Today's review is sponsored by Humpty Dumpty, the new breakfast-themed dating app, for those who like a good jump start to their morning. Make your sex life sunny side up, or over easy if you like it that way.
Watch it, Alan, I'm shooting.
The Last House on the Left.
To avoid fainting, keep repeating.
It's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
Take as much as you can.
Only a movie.
Luckily, I'm the second to last house on the left, so we're in good shape. In 1972, Wes Craven began his career with, at the time, one of the most disturbing and depraved movies in American horror. But before we get into that, we have to step back to 1969. The Manson family murders had just occurred, the Vietnam War was still going on, and the horrors of war were now being broadcast on people's TV screens. Horror was no longer far away, it was being brought closer to home. Art has always been influenced by reality. Horror movies are no different. In the 30s through the 50s, horror always came from far away, either some faraway land or from outer space, stuff like that. Horror always seemed so far away from the comforts of your own home. But then certain elements began to occur that changed the horror genre into what we know it as today. In the 1950s, Ed Gein's House of Horrors was discovered. In 1966, the Walter Whitman mass shootings happened. In 1969, you had the Manson family murders. So as these events started happening, you saw horror movies getting closer and closer and closer to home, focusing more on domestic horror. Now horror wasn't happening way out in the country. It wasn't coming from outer space. It wasn't coming from some foreign land. It wasn't happening in these big gothic locations. It was happening right in our backyards. And thus, going into the 1970s, we started seeing more domestic horror. Horror happening closer to people's homes. Horror happening in people's homes. Horror movies started to become more violent and depraved, and focused on, like I said, more realistic horror. And then in 1972, we got The Last House on the Left. And a heads up here, I'm going to be talking spoilers in this video, so that's a spoiler alert, but this isn't a movie I can recommend to everybody. There are people who have not watched Last House on the Left, and they may not want to watch Last House on the Left. This is a movie that's notorious for being disturbing and graphic and dark. So yes, there are people out there who do not like those kinds of movies, so if you have not seen Last House on the Left and you're okay with rougher subject matter, go check it out, but if not, I completely understand. So, just a heads up, spoiler alert, and now let's get into it. So The Last House on the Left was the first movie directed by Wes Craven and produced by Sean S. Cunningham, the man who directed the first Friday the 13th movie. So this film was a catalyst for two of the biggest franchises in the horror genre. In the movie, it's Mary Collingwood's 17th birthday. She's going to a concert with her friend Phyllis, who's a little more of a wild child than Mary.
What worries you? From what Nancy Springer tells me, that's not all she takes care of down there.
Her parents are waiting for her to come home so they can celebrate their daughter's birthday, but sadly, Mary will not be coming home. 4 vicious criminals have just escaped prison, led by the sadistic and intense Krug, played by the great David Hess. Rest in peace. Eventually, the two girls cross paths with this gang of thugs who kidnap them. These psychopaths take Mary and Phyllis into the woods, ironically not too far from Mary's house, unbeknownst to them, and they proceed to rape, torture, and eventually murder the two girls.
Now, I'm gonna tell this little lady here to do something. And if she doesn't do exactly what I tell her to, I want you to cut her, friend.
But our story doesn't end there. The four criminals, posing as civilians, find their way to Mary's parents' house. They don't know it's Mary's parents at first, and at first the parents don't know who these people are. They welcome them into their home to spend the night. But soon the parents find out the truth of what happened to their daughter. And in the final act, they get revenge on the people who killed Mary. Last House on the Left was heavily influenced by The Virgin Spring, which came out in 1960. These two movies are part of the rape revenge genre, which is a rough genre to watch given its subject matter. When it comes to these kinds of movies, I prefer when the person who was attacked is the one who gets revenge on their attackers, not so much a family member getting revenge. I'm one of those people who prefers I Spit on Your Grave over Last House on the Left, because it's the victim getting revenge. I just find it more satisfying when the victim is the one who rises up against her attackers and gets revenge on them.
Johnny made me do it! I didn't want to do it! He made me do it!
Suck it, bitch.
But Last House on the Left is still a great, disturbing movie. Very effective, very intense, especially for the time it came out. This is one of those movies that truly brought horror closer to home. The majority of the horror literally happens close to Mary's house, and eventually in Mary's house. I mean, what's more closer to home than parents finding out that their child has been murdered?
Oh, God, John. Jesus Christ. Isn't there anything we can do for her?
Nothing.
John.
She's dead.
Oh, my baby.
One of the reasons why I love 1970s horror so much is because this was the decade when so many filmmakers started diving into taking what is familiar and making that scary. So many of us have babysat in our lives, whether for friends, family, or just to make some extra money. Throw in a masked killer, you got Halloween. So many people love going to the beach during the summer, splashing around in the water to cool off. Throw in a killer shark, you've got Jaws. In Last House on the Left, there is so much that's familiar. Mary is going out to celebrate her 17th birthday. She's literally taken to the woods near her home to be tortured. The third act takes place in a house that looks like a lot of the houses most of us grew up in.
What's your name now, little angel? Mary. She was a lot tougher than you were, Doc.
Not to mention that the killers in this movie are not supernatural. They're not Freddy, Jason, or Michael. They're very realistic in terms of criminals. A lot of times we see them just hanging out together as regular people before they go do this sadistic shit.
Sit down my beer, okay?
You heard it. Go to the icebox and get a beer. There's a lady in there.
This is a very tragic story. These two girls are killed so violently. Phyllis's death is such a brutal stabbing, one of the most violent in horror. She's stabbed repeatedly until she's disemboweled. The actors had a hard time making this movie. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff talking about how hard the filmmaking was, not just because of the conditions due to the lack of money, but because of the brutality of the story. Wes Craven once said in an interview that when they filmed Phyllis's death, after the scene was done, they all broke for lunch, everybody was covered in artificial blood, everyone went off by themselves, and nobody ate. these scenes are such a punch in the gut, and it's mostly because this is not a slasher going around killing a bunch of people. It's this group of people torturing these two girls. I think that when a movie focuses its violence on one person or a couple of people, it makes the violence a little more personal and more hard-hitting in a way. Mary's rape alone is so nauseating. This film is not afraid to show the grittiness of everything. There's blood, dirt, and spit all over the place. The one moment that makes me shudder the most is when Krug gets off of Mary. There's this line of drool on her face as he stands up. It's that extra detail that makes things so much worse. And there's no happy ending here. The movie does end with the parents killing Krug and his gang, which is satisfying. We do get to see these scumbags get their comeuppance, but their daughter is still dead. Mary's still not coming home. And then there's the scene stealer, David Hess as Krug. And yes, this name would go on to be Krueger in Nightmare on Elm Street. David Hess was great in this role. He got typecast quite a bit after this and ended up playing creeps like this in quite a few movies. Anyway, Krug is such a scary villain. He's a true sadist. He doesn't just want to kill people, he wants to torment them and humiliate them.
Piss your pants.
Piss your pants.
I said piss your pants.
And he's enjoying it too. You can see a tiny bit of Freddy Krueger in this character, just the seeds that would eventually become Freddy Krueger. But for me, Krug without the is scarier than Freddy, just because of how real he is, and how nonchalant he is about being this sadistic son of a bitch.
Hit her.
Hard. Sock it to her, baby.
Hit her. I said hit her.
And the extra level of is the fact that one of the characters is his son, Junior, who he has gotten addicted to drugs so he can control him. Junior's situation is almost as tragic as Mary and Phyllis's. You can tell he wants to be a good person, but he's so fucked up by these drugs and so controlled by his father that he bends to his will every time, which leads to another tragic scene in the movie where Krug convinces Junior to kill himself.
I want you to take the gun, and I want you to put it in your mouth. And I want you to blow your brains out. No! Blow your brains out! Blow your...
So yeah, David Hess's Krug, one of the greatest villains in the horror genre. He also did the soundtrack for this movie, so that's cool. The only thing that bugs me about Last House is the comedic scenes. There are these two cop characters in the movie that are there for comedic relief, one of them played by Martin Kove, who played Kreese in the Karate Kid movies. We keep cutting back and forth between these dark, sadistic, disturbing scenes and these goofy scenes with these good old boy cops.
We hate cops.
Now, this does not ruin the movie for me. There are plenty of films that focus on dark, disturbing things, but they have goofy moments sprinkled throughout. The Untold Story is a Hong Kong film that is dark, disturbing, and twisted, but it has silly moments sprinkled here and there. So yeah, it doesn't bother me too much, but it does create some tonal whiplash, especially since this movie does focus more on the disturbing stuff. We're looking at these really fucked up scenes, and then we cut to this.
Now listen, if you tell any of the boys at the lodge about this, I'm gonna fix your
I've heard two arguments for these scenes. One, they give you a break from the disturbing moments, which I understand when watching these kinds of movies. Sometimes you need a break from the darker stuff. The other argument I've heard is the goofy scenes make the disturbing scenes more disturbing. That argument doesn't hold any water for me. I don't need a silly scene with two cops riding on top of a chicken truck to make a scene where a psychopath carves his name into a woman's chest before assaulting her more disturbing. The reason I think these scenes were put into the movie is because Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham were part of the hippie movement, part of that anti-establishment, anti-authority, stick-it-to-the-man attitude. That's why I think these scenes were put into the film. It was their way at poking fun at authority figures.
You know I'm a solemnly sworn officer of the law. Now I got the law on my side, Ada.
And Sheriff, I got the chickens and the truck.
Last House on the Left is a good movie, but it's not for everybody. It's disturbing, depressing, deals with some dark subject matter, and it's part of a rough subgenre. It's a good movie. Disturbing movies can be good. You just have to be in the right frame of mind for them. And with that, let's get to the Grindhouse rankings. We've got a body count of 6. The kills consist of, but are not limited to, gunshots, stabbings, a slit throat, and death by chainsaw. There's a good amount of nudity here. None of it is pleasant because it mostly involves assault. Krug is a terrifying villain, one of the most sadistic bad guys in horror. David Hess is awesome in this role. We feel for the victims. As much as I love movies with high body counts, when you focus on 1 or 2 people being brutalized, it makes the horror more personal. The comedic scenes do grind the movie to a halt, but they don't ruin the film. The movie is disturbing and depressing, not a flick everybody will like. And the ending is satisfying, but still depressing. I'm giving this a 4.5 out of 5. If you want to give this movie a shot, go for it. But just keep the subject matter in mind. As always, I want to thank all of you for continuing to watch and support this channel. Please leave a comment down below. Let me know who you think is the scariest villain in horror. Not your favorite villain, the scariest for you. This is the Maniac, here to remind you that the Grindhouse will never die. To avoid leaving angry comments in the comment section, keep repeating, it is only some random schmuck's opinion. Only some random schmuck's opinion. Only some random schmuck's opinion.